Appreciate it, Megan, and appreciate all of you sticking around. I always like to start these panels with my now famous pop quizzes. I happen to read the White House executive order, reread it. This is the one on artificial intelligence that was issued October of 2023, October 30th. So I said, well, let me find out how many times integration is cited in the executive order. Anyone want to guess?
Less than 10.
One time. I was really disappointed. Law enforcement? Take a guess. No panel members guess because someone's going to get some coffee. Anyone want to take a guess? Law enforcement, how many times? Come on, how many? Close enough, 11, not bad. DHS, 37 times it was cited. All right. We did have a last-minute substitution. I love the Border Patrol's nimbleness. Thank you very much for doing that. All right. Mike, let's start with you at HSI. I want to talk to you about, you all have a monster responsibility with national security, protecting on child exploitation, et cetera, illegal import of goods and items. It's a big portfolio. Give me and if you could, enrich us in speaking on behalf of all of HSI versus perhaps your own unit. How's the technology? What's the state of the technology out there these days? You've got a case management system out there. Does it need to be refreshed? How's Raven doing? Or is it just, hey, give me some new PCs and radios and mobile phones and we're good to go?
That was the old days. That was definitely the old days. Just a mobile radio.
Softball to set them up. Yes.
Mobile radio and a cell phone and a badge and a gun and go out and make your cases. But obviously times have changed. Just very briefly speaking on behalf of HSI, and I know a couple of my colleagues were on a panel earlier talking about the fentanyl crisis. Everything within HSI is, and you used that word integrated earlier in your opening remarks, your pop quiz. That's really the underlying premise of everything we're doing at HSI and certainly within the DHS Cybercrime Center is trying to integrate our technology to keep up and keep a pace with the adversaries that we're tasked and required to go after. They've gotten more sophisticated, so in turn we're trying to keep up. You talk about the AI governance document there, the executive order. That certainly guides us, has guided us, especially when it comes to some of the evolving technologies that we're involved in. And you mentioned Raven, trying to get beyond that cell phone and mobile radio, now having essentially a handheld personal AI assistant for each special agent, each analyst in the field to be able to tap into all of the disparate networks, disparate systems that we have, not just within HSI, but within DHS and within law enforcement and U.S. government as a whole, is absolutely critical to be able to move at that speed that's necessary to combat today's 21st century cyber adversary.
Appreciate that and interesting outlook on some of the sort of technology landscape at HSI. Sure to accelerate here in the not too distant future. Let's talk about PMOD. I want to talk about the capability roadmap, and when you look at that, and I think about the interoperability and some of the coordination across the various offices, how does one sort of look at that and make sure that these things are being instilled properly, thought through as far as looking at that different technology and then making sure it's getting incorporated smoothly into those various entities?
That's an excellent question. And I would point to open source. You can find PMOD's, I don't know the title, the design manual for interoperability. And there's something very important in there that's called the levels of conceptual interoperability model. And that model has 6 levels, starting with the basic levels of integration, which is systems and syntactic. Can you connect things? Can they exchange information? But as you move up that levels of conceptual interoperability model, you get to level 6, which is the highest level of interoperability, which is what they call the reference layer. And what that means is You have to have the ability to have a shared conceptual reference model that has the same embedded semantic context or meaning. What I mean by that is in our data models, you have embedded computable meaning to an interoperable standard like the one I mentioned at an earlier talk, basic formal ontology. So before we even started, I should have asked for a pop quiz myself, like how did we even define integration? Are we integrated here in this room because we're together? Are we integrated because we're on a panel? I don't know the answer to that. But how I think of it is, I can call China. We're integrated at least through communications. I may even be able to speak Chinese or have a translator. Are we integrated? Yes, I think. Are we interoperable yet? I don't know. I would say I would need the capability to be able to exchange information and understand meaning in a way that creates value and solves a problem that we couldn't individually achieve. And I think that metaphor works generally for agents when we talk about systems. But to answer your question and sum up, the capability roadmap is a map for maturation and evolution, and then the design manual for interoperability is us wanting to walk up that ladder to get to interoperability at the reference layer. So if I want to be interoperable with ICE, CBP, FBI, NATO, that we'll have a reference model that is language agnostic, where we can do machine-to-machine communication using those standards to solve problems.
Appreciate that. All right, we're going to go over to CBP and talk about data analysis and ground zero, right? And if I think about some of these enhanced technology, obviously we've talked throughout a good part of the day about some of these capabilities, which undoubtedly you all are starting to layer into your environment there. What does that look like? How do you use that? How do you make sure that's going to be integrated smoothly, properly, and then allow these decisions to be made with the operators?
Yeah, sure. So, generative AI and machine learning are really impressive and have been making improvements significantly over time. But in my experience, I've often found that they aren't the right tools for the questions that we have. I've heard it quoted that 80% accuracy is really great for some tasks and horrible for others. Imagine if our airlines had an 80% accuracy in landing airplanes. I feel like in our CBP mission space, we are very similar. We don't have the luxury of 80% accuracy. We have lives on the line, national security missions. So when we talk about machine learning and AI, we often talk about it as if it's a thing. It's not a thing. It's an outcome. It's an outcome, and what we're doing is we're buying the capability for our machines to learn, to reason, and the outcome of that is AI. Those are the two things that we've really been focusing in on. And when we go back and reflect on this need that we have to be accurate, we are really focusing in on the foundational piece, I think that you've heard a lot about today already, which is how do we get good data? It doesn't matter what AI you throw on top of your data if you don't have good data. So we have to apply meaning into our data. And the goal of which is to be able to have our operators trust the analysis, trust the tools that we are putting into their hands at the end of the day, so that we have the foundation for human-machine teaming. Michael mentioned it earlier. He's putting devices in the hands of HSI agents so that they're able to rely on that as a tool. We want to take that even further and have that human-machine teaming capability available for our agents, officers, and pilots on the line.
So do you feel so far it's been successful? Do they trust it, or is it like, whoa, this is...
Certain things.
Okay,
Certain things, Luke.
fair enough.
I think that we have a long way to go to be able to say that we trust our data. I mean, I think that's the question that it would go back to. Do we trust the data that we have in our systems?
Fantastic. All right, let's talk from an industry perspective. And I want to talk about, we're going to get right into it, and let's talk about the discussions around requirements with the operators, right? And the folks that are generating these requirements, having these conversations, and trying to bring these conversations left of a procurement so that you're not in sort of this quarantined type of situation. And you've had a lot of experience in this area. Perhaps you'll have some recommendations on what you've seen, what's been working, perhaps what's not working.
So I think the first thing that we deal with a lot is silos. And what I mean by that is conflicting requirements from different departments within the same agency for the same thing, which is kind of ironic. So, for example, you have Border Patrol requiring devices for communications, for example, that are small, diverse, some body-worn, but then at the same time, you want vehicle, you want, like, the diversity of the requirement is significant. And then at the same time, you have the tower program, which requires a fixed location for the same type of communication device, for example. The requirements itself are actually the same. It's like I need uptime to a level of a certain amount versus the money I want to pay. I want 5 nines uptime, or I want 3 nines uptime, and I'm willing to pay $100 or $300, whatever that is, right? It's a scale that you decide on that. But today, what happens is you're taking the tower program, or you're taking a particular program itself, and you're creating the requirements only around that program, but yet 90% of that standard that you've built can be utilized across 30 programs or 40 programs. What that does, it gives you scale, it gives you efficiency, it gives you a lot of cost reduction, and the last 10% you do customization. And I find that a lot of times these programs individually are tasks with the requirements completely separate from the others, and they don't communicate, yet they have the same requirement. I need an uptime or 5 nines, and I need the speed of whatever, 10 megabits or 100 megabits or whatever that may be. So I can move the data from the field into a processing center. Because at the end of the day, anything that you do at the edge, anything that happens in the field, it has to communicate back and forth, whether that's information to the agents, or that's information from the agents back to a central environment where you may use AI to process some of that, or you may use documents for storage for identification, or you may use it for an operation at that moment in time because it's real time and it's important, whether that's video, whether that's text, whether that's an image, whatever it may be. And I find it's interesting that the diversity, so what I've found so far that has worked very well is actually talking to the field and then bringing that conversation from the field back into a PMOD conversation and going, hey, this is actually what I've heard that the field happens. And then they don't always have that full-fledged conversation. And that actually creates a little bit of a...
I've lived it, yes.
Not on the same page, right?
That,
And then you've got the standardization world, which is the OIT side of it, which tries to drive security infrastructure, which is extremely important, right?
Yeah.
So standardizing across all these things, I think, would be very helpful if there would be a lot more collaboration on things like communications, on things like standardization of data, as you've just described it, right? What is data and how does it communicate? What is a standard that you require for accuracy from an AI processing perspective? And how quickly and how much data do you need to move, and what's data is pertinent for your HSI operators in the field at that moment in time?
Let me do this. I should have mentioned that we will take a little bit of time at the end here for some questions, so please make sure you have some of those teed up. I'm thinking that some of you may want to weigh in on this conversation, but I also think some of the panel members may want to weigh in on this. Thoughts about what is being described here? Any of you?
All right,
Fire
well,
away.
I think that it's human nature to jump right to the problem. And I think that, first of all, I agree with everything you said. But we skip over the first requirement, which is, are we capturing the subject matter expertise to understand and frame the problem? And then are we representing that in an unambiguous and precise way for both people and sometimes what we're talking about here, machines to use? And I don't think there's any real new requirements. I think there's, except for one, a more strict requirement in our knowledge representation for how we actually capture that to use information. I mean, a famous physicist recently said, a world-class physicist, that information has physical properties and velocity. It makes up, it's a building block of the nature of the universe, and we should consider it the fifth state of matter. And in order to actually harness what he's saying there, is treat it not as something that is just this ephemeral, like, yeah, data, interoperability, information, knowledge, but treat it as a commodity and drive requirements about how you capture, represent, and take these artifacts or data products and make them consumable but from an interoperable way in terms of that levels of conceptual interoperability model. Dr. Andreas Tolk, actually, he was the author of that published paper. So shout out to him.
That's well said. And I also think that, frankly, it's one of the most complex things. Take something extremely complex and make it simple. It is the hardest thing to do. Yep. And the reality is you've got age gaps between the agents on awareness and knowledge and willingness to use technology. I think that's also part of that's influencing requirements and needs for the various systems. From our perspective, from a communications perspective, what we've tried to do is we've tried to simplify the world. We've tried to create a standard communication system that allows you to plug in your uptime and your capacity requirements at the edge and in various formats, whether it's vehicles, bodies, or buildings. So people, vehicles, buildings, that's how we look at it. And then you plug in whatever links you ultimately want. And those will drive an uptime and a capacity requirement that you can now define that across everything and then just move the data back into the same environment, the same system on the other side, and you prioritize the information as you need to.
Speaking of technology integration, I was going to go weigh in, and then I got a question for you.
To wrap that up, I think all good points here, and like Martina was mentioning a moment ago, the data is important, right? But and the tools that we need to govern that, to collate it, to be able to access and analyze that data. Each of our agencies, and obviously the private sector, we're fantastic at collecting data. Yes. We're fantastic at vacuuming up, for lack of a better term, all the data. I've got 235 domestic field offices and 90 foreign offices full of HSI special agents doing the investigative work. That doesn't include the massive amount of personnel that CBP and Border Patrol have, all dumping information into disparate systems, siloed systems, being able to use that data exists. So the AI tools that we need, the AI tools that we're trying to develop in-house and that we're trying to procure from all of you, are those tools that will connect those dots amongst and kind of go back to that one DHS module model that we've all kind of grown up with, at least professionally, going back to the creation of DHS back in '03. So that's the necessity, because again, it's not a matter of being able to collect the data; it's being able to take the data, interface it with everything else that's available to an investigator or to an officer, and be able to action that, to be able to determine and predict with a high degree of probability where the next incursion on the border is going to be, where the next shipments go, where the next container is going to try to be smuggled into, where the next transnational criminal network is going to try to scam a financial institution, for example. So that's the necessity that we're looking at.
Let's jump over to CBP for a minute and talk about just technology integration, right? You all are putting together a lot of capability there. You're layering on some technology. You're sending it out into the field, allowing them to make good decisions. Give us some lessons learned there, maybe some success stories about some things that have gone well, maybe some things that you've learned that, clearly need to be recalibrated.
Luke, broadly speaking, what we did was we married symbolic reasoning with traditional machine learning. Now, historically, traditionally, those two things have been separate. But what is novel is the graph-based standards approach with symbolic reasoning with machine learning. And we found that when we did that, data latency was no longer an issue. We were able to trace our data back, and we were able to have data available to us in real time to help us make predictions. The problems that we're all facing that you're hearing about, they're not new. The solutions that we're employing are not new. But what is new is the solution, how we're bringing these solutions together. And it's been successful. We actually did this. Earlier this year, we had a field demonstration testing our capability to integrate several systems, automate pattern recognition, and send an alert to a CBP handheld device and a CBP helicopter, which worked. in a cost-effective way that enhanced the situational awareness for our agents and pilots for their safety. And the even more amazing thing is that the pilot trusted the device when it alerted the pilot to a potential threat in the air. That's our first example of that real human-machine teaming that I was talking about before.
Impressive, and I'm going to get to you in a moment, but let me ask you sort of a similar question, a little bit of a different twist. As you all are looking to incorporate some of these technologies into your environment and then send them out to these agents, that has to be sort of fused with the rest of the work that they're doing, right? Whether it's a new analytics capability, something to do with the case management system, whatever it may be. You know, how does that work? How do you sort of think that through? What are the steps you're going through to make sure from an agent's perspective, that's sort of a seamless experience? To the greatest extent it can be.
Yeah, and that's the challenge, right? And seamless is the operative word. Is, you know, agents, you know, out in the field. And again, we are so focused here, and I've been at headquarters off and on for 10 years, minus some field assignments in between. But when you're in the field, you're not necessarily thinking about those types of issues. You're thinking about the day-to-day, making your investigation, connecting the dots, and growing your investigation to ultimately lead to a prosecution. The last thing we want to do from a headquarters perspective, and certainly from a senior executive perspective, is hinder the day-to-day operations, the investigations that are taking place. So we try to do it in a manner that can integrate with what they're already doing, right? And getting that feedback from the field is absolutely paramount, and asking the field, what is it that you all need? And having those town halls, and whether it's myself or any of my senior executive colleagues going out to the field and actually hearing from the ground, from the troops, from the agents in the field, what is it that you need? And so I used to run our tactical teams for our DC office when I was an ASAC, and you know, working with those guys, what is it that you actually need versus what is it that headquarters thinks you need? And that's a huge difference. Hearing it from the agents in the field as to what their day-to-day challenges are, and then trying to, again, seamlessly integrate that into their ongoing investigations without creating any sort of undue delay in their day-to-day work is absolutely critical. It's a challenge and not always successful, especially when you roll out a new system. I was in the field when ICM came on board, and we made the switch from text to ICM, and talk about, like, you know, taking a couple of weeks off from your investigations just to learn the new system. But that was necessary. But once you got the handle and the hang of it, then you were so much more efficient as an agent, being able to upload your reports and being able to upload actual images and things to the reports as attachments. So sometimes there is a necessity to create a little bit of a stoppage if it's going to ultimately get a better return on investment, but we try to minimize that to the greatest extent possible.
Fair enough. We're going to take 2 more questions here at the panel and then open it up here. So comms, secure comms, right in your wheelhouse. She was describing that, you know. What does it take to pull that together to make sure that you have that done right and gain the trust of the operator when that gets delivered?
Well, there's a couple of things.
Sort of real world here, right?
Yeah, no, I know. It's so practicality of it is, I don't think there's such thing as a 100% secure system in this world, because there's always a human factor, which always causes a problem as far as security goes. There's too many phishing, and so I think the most important thing about security, whenever somebody asks me that question, is about training the humans that are behind it and making sure they know how to protect their own information so they don't get scammed to enter the system. Systems themselves, they're actually quite well designed in a way that you can't easily hack them. We had a conversation earlier actually with somebody about quantum computing, and that may be happening in the future. There might be a risk, but at this point in time, that doesn't exist yet as a risk factor. However, making sure that you follow the standards, you see all the time all these security bulletins that come out with all the holes that exist in security infrastructure. So making sure you're up to date on that, it's extremely important. And look, it is a nightmare out there as far as the amount of holes that exist and the amount of ways around things. But I firmly believe that if you follow a proper standard, I think I was speaking with Mr. Bagawalia a while back, and he told me something like 180 million attacks a day that CPB handles per day. That's how many attempts there are on the websites and all the infrastructure that they've got. It's like it was a crazy amount. It got stuck in my head as far as the number goes. It's absolutely ridiculous. So obviously making sure that you have all the newest vulnerability and all that stuff. But the only way you can do this is make sure you're really quick at patching. You're really quick at being aware of notifications. And it comes back to a very simple thing I was going to mention earlier, and the helicopter example that you've done is, I think the most important thing out of this entire conversation is how do you, as was discussed, is like how do you get all the data put together, but how do you create actionable intelligence, which is what this is, that delivers information that's pertinent to that particular information for that particular officer in the field to ensure that they do their job in the best way possible and they're aware of the most amount of information possible. So the UI and the interface is probably equally important to the good of the data below that.
Customer experience, we could talk all day about that. I want to talk about speed, go back to BPOD and talk about, I don't know, I have a sneaking suspicion that one's going to look at this way we're acquiring goods and services and say, boy, why aren't we moving at the speed of light? Why aren't we, what are these CSOPs? What are these OTAs? What are these SIBRs? Why don't we do things faster than we're doing them today? I know you all have done some of that. You want to speak to sort of non-FAR versus traditional FAR type acquisitions. Any thoughts on that?
Sure, and just to make it clear, I don't represent the Border Patrol Program Management Office Directorate. I've worked with them for years. They're great partners. So in case
don't pay attention to the uniform he's wearing.
Well, anything I say that's correct is because
I
of
understand.
that. But anything that's wrong is on me.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, so look, the FAR was put in place to ensure fair and open competition and compliance, make sure that the government can get access to the best goods and services, in a fair and equitable way. However, it's still very social. It's a social process. And a lot of the things that we discussed today are social problems. People have to talk to other people, write down words for other people to vet, for other people to read, for other people to understand, to then have meetings to be understood, to then go back to me on a panel to judge the words people wrote, and that just takes so much time. And back to AI, that should be focusing, in my opinion, on using AI tools to help us accelerate our business processes. I mean, there is no reason why we can't have a data sharing policy compliance ontology that would be able, we know the policies and laws, we know the authorities, we know the data elements, and we know the rules within the FAR, that it should be able to recognize, I should have an ask and tell system that says, I want to accomplish this contract for these resources with these parameters using this data, and then you would be able to quickly pull the laws that govern it in the FAR and in CRCL, Civil Rights, Civil Liberties, privacy, PTAs, PIAs, all of that, and then pre-build your research packet that you know you have to do every single time over and over and over again. Those are the things that are appropriate for AI/ML tools to routinize the things humans are always going to have to do with the FAR or non-FAR OTA mechanisms. So that's what I think is really an opportunity, is what are the ways we can accelerate our business processes by automating the human functions to fill out all the different paperwork we have to, which is important for policy, compliance, privacy, fairness, and open competition, but do it faster so that humans only have to deal with the judgments that require human on-the-loop decision-making. Give me the research packet ahead of time that accelerates all the paperwork you must have.
And I don't think anyone's going to argue with that out there. Any questions? Got one right here.
So, great comment on data. Data is so important. So, Angelique Irvin, Clearline.
Try to elevate it up there because we don't have a, yeah.
We make the surveillance systems on the northern and southern borders. We're the largest provider.
You got a mic coming right behind you there.
Or whatever percentage. There you go. If half of those systems are down, or whatever percentage, how do you get good data? And if you don't have if you don't have repair budgets, but you only get new system budgets, how do we continue that operational piece and collate all that data in a way that helps our mission for the guys in the field who don't have eyes, because they need them? And I think that's my question.
How do we deal with that? I mean, it's terrible. I had to deal with it when I was division chief in Buffalo sector over the technology portfolio, and things would go down and parts would be on back order, and you have to reprioritize. And you have to take folks that were doing other things that were more productive and cover down in your areas of high threat and high interest. So you go back to basics. I mean, at the end of the day, Border Patrol is about looking at the ground and tracks and driving down the road, pulling a tire and looking for data, whether it's with the agent, every agent's a sensor, or the technology. So when technology goes down, it's a massive hit to our productivity and efficiency.
Next question.
Sorry, I jumped in, that hit me.
Ryan, congrats, entertaining as always. You know, to kind of take it as at a larger perspective, at the integration of the tech. You know, we've got three fairly distinct roles here: HSI, CBP, and Border Patrol. What are the common threads you see when you look at bringing in a new tech and that opportunity for the force multiplier, reducing the cognitive load, or new sensor phenomenology? Where do you see the greatest pitfalls, or the most common pitfalls, and where do you see, you know, the sort of the best model to follow? What's the best practice?
That's a fantastic question. I always start with going to what we can all agree on, and we can always agree that we want our agents, officers, special investigators, pilots, analysts, whomever to be safe and effective. Then second, maybe the pitfall is we all have to move out on our mission, and we all get judged by our boss or our performance plans on what we're supposed to do. And sometimes we get tunnel vision on making sure our program is successful. And often it's useful to remind ourselves to step back and say, how am I making the mission successful? And making sure those align. And at the end of the day, back to the social problem, you can't automate collaboration and relationship building. So there's always a person aspect of me going to my partners in HSI, CBP, industry, and say, hey, this is what I think I need, and this is what I want to try to do, and then make sure that we have that shared understanding or shared effective understanding. And it's people at the end of the day that are at the beginning and end of that loop.
Any other thoughts on that one? Any other questions? Because I got a couple of them. I got a whopper here to close it out. One more here, and then
Thanks. Good discussion. Just curious if you could speak to some of the laws and policies, if there's any obstacles for integrating more tech. I know some of the other countries and state and local law enforcement have different laws and policies that sometimes make buying and integrating things easier. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I actually was discussing this morning, that exact issue. I'll use the generative AI and some of the AI tools that HSI currently uses for criminal investigations as an example. We have some fantastic tools, both in-house and commercially available, that we utilize specifically for child exploitation investigations. Investigations of networks of individuals who are sexually exploiting children online, posting those images, trading those images. Some of the tools that we use, while extremely effective and extremely powerful, because we're a transnational criminal investigative agency, we have to work, and rightfully so, should be working with our foreign partners. Some of our foreign partners, such as those within the EU, take a wholly different perspective on the use of certain AI tools for investigative purposes because their privacy thresholds are so much higher in certain areas within the EU construct. That poses an issue. So being able to work side by side with our foreign partners, and I think I mentioned earlier, we have 90 foreign offices. So by definition, most of our investigations are transnational in nature. We have to take into account what we can share with our foreign partners, what kind of cases we can work. We work child exploitation cases with them, but we have to take extra care in the development of those investigative leads, how we come to share information, things along those lines make it complicated. And I anticipate and forecast that those issues are going to just get more complicated as we continue to push forward, in the coming years, certainly, with additional generative AI and AI-powered tools, large language models and things of that nature, that may give some of our foreign partners who are absolutely critical in our global investigations a bit of pause when working with us. So we've got to work that out on a policy level.
I'm going to wrap it up with one last question for each of the panel members. Same question. Let's talk about sort of the next biggest threat. CBP, I want to start with you. And sort of fast forward, we have a lot of knowns out there. No doubt there's some unknowns. What's in your job jar going forward as far as the biggest threat?
This might sound a little revolutionary, but Luke, I don't think it matters what the next threat is. It doesn't matter because we aren't effectively utilizing our data right now for our current threats. We have a vast amount of unused data. And I would say that the biggest threat to the CBP mission, and probably even expanding that across the Homeland Security enterprise, would be to say it's our lack of capability for an interoperable data infrastructure that will help us support decision-making across domains. I would wager that, similar to what, again, some of the panelists have already mentioned on this panel and previously, that the next threat, we know about it. It is in our systems, but we are not able to connect those dots. Just DHS, in and of itself, of which CBP is a part, we have over 900 largely disconnected systems, estimating that about 60% of the data in those systems is unknown or unused. That is just mind-boggling when you think about that. And so we have this mountain of data available at our disposal for exploitation, and we're not able to exploit it. The US government's inability to connect the dots and pull the meaning from our databases, that's not new language that we've been talking about today, is it? I would wager that every person in this room or near everybody read the 9/11 Commission report when it came out 20 years ago. And it said something similar. How the US government has a vast amount of data at its disposal. And when you don't take into account traditional intelligence databases and you put in on top of that customs and immigration data, the storehouse is immense. But what we as the government are not good at doing is utilizing and processing that information. And across the government agencies, official after official implored the 9/11 Commission to please bring attention to the unglamorous back office side of government operations. And don't get me wrong, a lot of great work has been done in these past almost 25 years since then. But I would ask each of us, are we where you think we should be 25 years after 9/11? I think we could be better. We need to be better. So let's be better.
Some powerful statements there, Border Patrol. I saw you nodding your head there in agreement.
Yes, I'm going to take the opposite approach, but I'm going to blame somebody else. A few months ago, former CEO Eric Schmidt of Google said he believes we're going to be in a war for knowledge supremacy with near-peer competitors in our time. I'll tell you, I believe that's happening now. And what knowledge supremacy means is the ability to, we say things like actionable information or data fusion at the speed of the mission. It's exactly that. The ability to use our technology and tools to recognize data, convert it into information, add context and meaning, get that only the things humans need to know, or even actuate kill web, kill chain from a military perspective, AI versus AI battlefield management. That's probably the greatest threat that I see. And how that will happen is the first global power to combine machine learning and machine reasoning. Machine learning is our math, and machine reasoning is the graph. And when you're able to put those together to create actionable data in near real time, you're going to have AI versus AI knowledge supremacy, and whoever does it better with more accurate context and finely tuned models and ontologies is going to win. And honestly, that does keep me up at night because this is all I do. You probably wonder why there's a Border Patrol agent in a green uniform talking Dennis Miller. I had to look that up, by the way. I didn't understand the Dennis Miller reference earlier. But Dennis Miller on Monday Night Football pulls out big words once in a while. Thanks for that. But that's what I think is the biggest threat. Is thank you for that. It's kind. Is the country that develops and combines existing technology in a new way, and maybe with additional technology like quantum computing to compute at speed and scale, is going to have a massive competitive advantage in all aspects and domains of global society.
Dejero, your perspective?
Well, cyber threats and everything else will arise every single day. That's not the challenge. I think the challenge is the mission that's being talked about here, which is creating a data layer that's ubiquitous and it's able to be interoperable and interactive. From our perspective, the only way that happens is with having a ubiquitous network infrastructure below that, which also doesn't exist because you've got all these diversity of technologies that are out there, whether it's LMR, which has its benefits. You've got LEOs, you've got GEOs, you've got MEOs, you've got multiple cellular technologies, you've got landlines, you've got talk about all of it, and it's not standardized, not interoperable, very difficult to integrate, different speed amounts, and it literally limits the amount of data that can be transferred or not, depending on what you're using. So from our perspective and our goal, what we're trying to do is we're trying to create this network fabric that's ubiquitous and transparent and always on and always available so that it enables the higher level technology such as data interaction and data interoperability in a seamless way. That's how we look at it.
Mike, take us home. Largest threat.
Yeah, and look, I'm in agreement with everybody on this panel, but I certainly, where I sit at the DHS Cybercrime Center, and I've had a front row seat. This is my second tour there now as I lead it. I see the biggest threat. Look, the threats out there are growing exponentially, and it depends on what you define as a threat from a criminal justice perspective, right? DTOs, multi-billion-dollar profitability by these DTOs that are larger than some of our largest corporations and
DTOs.
Drug trafficking organizations.
Thank you.
Obviously a threat. China and other geopolitical concerns that exist. But what I'm looking at, when I look at the next looming threat, it's not just on the horizon, it's already here. It's those potential adversaries, again, whether it's a criminal network, transnational criminal network, or a foreign adversary, harnessing the technology that currently exists and is available, readily available, and is on the horizon, and using that in a manner that helps them obfuscate their activities, makes this, in some cases, blind, as was brought up earlier, right? Our continued reliance on an aging infrastructure here in the United States that leaves us open to exploitation by criminal networks, extortion and blackmail, or by a foreign power, makes things tremendously concerning from my perspective. So the use of these tools, these tremendously powerful tools that we all essentially hold in our hands now. I mean, the fact that AI is now being layered into basic commercial software, prepackaged without any necessary training or anything like that. That it used to be we had to worry about a very small group of individuals with a lot of knowledge and a lot of abilities. Now, pretty much anybody can quickly learn through open source AI on how to create a deep fake and cause all kinds of mayhem in our democratic processes, everything else. So the threats are all over the place. It's, to me, the threat, it can be bucketed in simple terms that the misuse of the technologies that are continuously being developed out there as law enforcement, and that's my little narrow scope of the world, obviously, is how can we, as law enforcement, federal law enforcement, harness those and utilize those to leverage against the adversaries that are using it against us.
Well, on behalf of every single American, I want to thank everybody on this panel for everything that you do every day to keep this country safe. Can we have a round of applause for these patriots? Thank you very much.
Thank you.